Welcome to the Shared Practices Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Lowe. This is episode 8 of season 1, and today we're getting into ownership from the perspective of a specialist. We have with us Dr. Russell Kirk, who actually has his own podcast, The Business of Dentistry. We'll get into his podcast and what that's about in the interview. But real quick, before starting this episode, wanted to announce something exciting. There's a conference going on in Nashville, Tennessee called the Voices of Dentistry Summit. And I was actually just recently invited to do a workshop there. And so it's January 27th through the 28th. That's a Friday and a Saturday. I don't think I'm going to get approval from my residency to leave and be there for Friday, but I will definitely be there for Saturday. We're going to be doing a small workshop on creating a custom plan to overcome your student loans and move forward towards practice ownership. So this will be kind of version 1 of the eventual online course I'm building right now. That's January 27th and 28th in Nashville, Tennessee, the Voices of Dentistry Summit. And what's awesome is that if you've been listening to other dental podcasts, you probably know we're going to have all of the dental podcast hosts are all lecturing and speaking. So your favorite people like Alan Mead and Mark Costes, Gary Takis, even Russell Kirk, our interview today, all of them are going to be there and lecturing. So you're going to get to meet the people that you've come to learn from and love through listening to podcasts are all going to be there. It's going to be a ton of fun. And we actually have a promo code you can use. When you go to thevoicesofdentistry.com and sign up, if you use the promo code SHARED, SHARED, on your checkout, you'll get $200 off your admission. So voicesofdentistry.com, and we'll see you in Nashville. We have with us today Dr. Russell Kirk, who is an oral surgeon with his own podcast, actually, the Business of Dentistry Podcast. Did I say that right, Dr. Kirk?
That is correct. Please call me Russell.
Okay, Russell. So it's an honor to have you here. And I actually, my first week of my residency here in the Army, we had a fixed pros course where we prepped a crown on a patient, and then we took an impression, and then we poured that up and waxed up and cast our own gold crown and seeded it that Friday. So that week, I had a ton of lab time. And I kind of stumbled upon your podcast that week. So I actually binge listened to all, I think, 32 episodes at the time that were out. And just straight on like 1.5, maybe 2x. You've got a great voice. It speeds up really well. And I fell in love with your podcast. So I wanted
I appreciate it. That was a painful week. Lab work and listening to me for 30 hours or whatever.
I made it through. It was hard, but we did it. No, it was great. It made the time go by so much faster. So thank you for agreeing to be on our show. Do you mind, real quick, sharing your journey from dental school, where you went, to kind of how you ended up deciding on becoming an oral surgeon and your experience with the military and then your experience afterwards?
Oh, sure. I'd be glad to. First, I appreciate you having me on.
No problem.
I've been listening to your podcast, and you've got wonderful guests. I hope I can live up to that.
Oh, of course.
So I went to dental school at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center down in Memphis.
Okay.
I finished up in 1994, so been a few years.
Sure.
And much like you, I did a health profession scholarship. They had a 1-year gig with the Navy, so I got a 1-year scholarship my last year of dental school.
Okay.
And joined the Navy.
Back then, did they have the minimum 3-year repayment thing? So did you do 1 year and repay 1 year, or was it 1 year and repay 3?
It was a 1-year scholarship for 3 years obligation.
Okay. Similar to what they have going on.
Oh, is that the way it is now?
It is, yeah.
Okay. One of the nice things that happened was they offered me a GPR, and they counted that toward my obligation.
Oh, nice. That has changed. That is different now. If you do one of the 1 years, it doesn't count towards your obligation. It's a neutral year.
Okay, neutral year. So I was very fortunate. It was just timing, I think. So I left dental school, went to Great Lakes to the Naval Hospital and did a hospital residency up there with those guys.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. We, of course, very similar to most GPRs, we rotate through all the different specialties. And in doing so, I was able to rotate with the oral surgery group. And the 4 guys that were one resident per year, and those guys were great. They took me in. They beat me up pretty much every day, but I loved it. And I got to go hang out in surgery and ask questions.
Sure.
And it was such a phenomenal experience. I thought that was kind of the time I thought maybe this is something I might do if it works out for me.
So prior to that, you hadn't really thought of it?
Never even considered a specialty.
Okay.
I thought that I would go back to my hometown and work for my family dentist growing up had asked me to come back if I was interested. So I thought I would just go back to West Tennessee and go into private practice as a general restorative guy. And these guys turned my head a little bit when I got into the residency up there at Great Lakes.
Okay. So then after that, once you finished, where did you go next? And were you kind of dead set on oral surgery, or did it take you a little bit longer to kind of come around and make that decision?
No, I got linked up. My first duty station was in Port Hueneme, California. I worked for the CBs, the construction battalion.
Nice.
And it was interesting because I went out there. It's kind of an unknown secret. They put me in charge of a battalion, and I was the dental officer for an entire battalion of CBs.
Oh, no way.
I had 2 dental assistants, and I had my own clinic when we were deployed. So we were rotating through Guam, and then we went to Spain. So I had my own 2-chair clinic. So I had my own little private practice world right there in the military, so to speak.
Not too shabby.
Not too bad of an experience. And I never realized how it would play into my private practice life and managing a small clinic and then working, of course, the business side is a little different. You don't have to worry about all the financial side, but from a personnel standpoint, managing folks, it was really good for me to build my leadership skills.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because one of the reasons I say that I'm starting this podcast is that I feel like within the Army, I don't get exposed to a lot of business concepts and opportunities. However, all of the leadership and the personnel and managing people and motivating people sometimes applies even more, because in the military, you don't always have a choice of who you're leading and the circumstances under which that occurs. And so it's great in private practice to be able to hire the people you want to work with. Whereas in the military, you're kind of given who you're given, and you have to work with that set of personnel. And so leadership becomes, I feel like, even more important and a little more challenging at the same time. So once you're then in private practice, you've got that much more experience managing people and personnel.
Oh, sure. And being flexible, learning different personality types and how to interact with different folks. It's a very diverse organization, the military, as you know.
Right.
And you've got all kinds of different mindsets, and being able to work with people and still meet your end goal and meet your objectives. That's one of the things that I have found very valuable in my military experience.
Okay. So you went and did this little, 2 years, I'm assuming, of kind of private practice dentistry on a boat for the Navy. And then, not the whole time out at sea and all that, but then after that, what was your next either assignment, or did you get out? What was the next step?
Well, let me back up. We, the CBs are all ground forces.
Oh, okay.
So we were in the field most of the time. We support the Marine Corps.
Okay, so you were in Guam and Spain, but not on a ship?
Never on a ship. No, never on a ship.
Okay.
No, we have camps on those bases
nice.
that the CBs occupy. So we had freestanding clinics there,
sure,
and that's what we worked out of. So it was very much like probably like the Army in a certain respect. But I was reaching the end of my active duty obligation, and I got to thinking about the oral surgery gig again. And we got forward deployed to Bosnia.
Oh wow!
And I was in Bosnia with the CBs, and I was looking at the application deadlines, and there was no way I was going to make the application deadlines for oral surgery residency at that time. But one of the other CB dentists that I knew had went to Johns Hopkins, and he did an anesthesiology fellowship. They had a 1 year with a 2 year option to do anesthesia training.
Okay.
And so I thought, I'll call them. Although I'm over here, I'll call them and see what's available and what the deadline is.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? So I called them and told them that I was in Bosnia and I wanted to see if that option was still on the table. And they're like, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm over in Bosnia. I'm with the Navy now." And they're like, "When are you coming back?" And I told them, and they said, "We want to talk to you." Huh. So I did an interview. I got offered that anesthesiology, which was like a dream to me to go to Johns Hopkins. And I did an anesthesia fellowship.
Oh, wow.
And in that anesthesia fellowship year, I applied to oral surgery.
Okay.
And fortunately picked up my oral surgery residency.
And did you do that through the Navy, or was that a civilian residency?
All out service.
Okay.
All civilian.
Okay. So where did was the oral surgery residency also at Johns Hopkins or at a different facility?
No, actually, I went back to UT, back to Memphis to do that.
Okay. Nice. So did the anesthesia, do you feel like that ended up being repeat of what you got in your future residency, or was that like fundamental, kind of foundational? You're really glad you did that?
Oh, that's probably one of the best training years that I ever had.
Cool.
We coming in, I learned more medicine in that year than all 4 years of dental school combined.
Sure.
And probably, sad to say, but probably from a didactic standpoint, more than I did in my 4 years of oral surgery residency, because we were just so busy with clinical stuff.
Right, doing all the oral surgery.
All the oral surgery, and we were at a level 1 trauma center, so we were constantly, working. And so the didactics weren't as strong. They were great, but they weren't as strong as even what I got. They had a real good program set up at Hopkins for didactic anesthesia and medicine. So
that's awesome. Well, and it's amazing, everyone wants to have this plan straight out of school that I'm going to do this, and it's going to be A, B, and C. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but I feel like it hardly ever, if you're making decisions to expand your education, to expand your training, you're never going to look back and regret and say, "Oh man, I wish I hadn't have done that or the other." It's going to be those opportunities where you're not expanding, where you're not learning, you're not growing. Those are going to be the ones that you look back and maybe be frustrated with. Would you agree on that?
Well, I think it's like a lot of things in life. When you're in the mix, when you're in the trenches, you're like, "Man, this sucks." But when you get down the road and look at it, you're like, "That was more than worth it."
And I'm going to be saying that same thing about my residency in about 6 months. I hear about the 6-month mark for my residency is where everyone is like, "Why am I doing this? This is awful. All this lab work, all of this work." And then you get to the 2-year mark and you're all done with your 2-year residency and everyone is glad they did it. So
sure. You question yourself almost on a daily schedule.
Sure.
At times. But it's perseverance and just pushing through. You're learning a lot more than you even realize, and you get out in it. You'll be so thankful that you did it.
Okay. So from your oral surgery residency, where did you go next?
I was looking at an associateship with another surgeon.
Okay.
In the Middle Tennessee area. And we had met several times. We talked on the phone at first. I had found this contact through one of the staff at the residency program.
Okay.
He had trained there years before me. So they had mentioned that he was looking. "Why don't you talk to him?" Sure, I went and talked to him on the phone. Then we met in person. Then she's my wife now, but at the time, my girlfriend. We were looking at where we were going to land after we finished our training programs. And I talked to this guy, and it sounded so great. And we had talked, and we had met, and we had kind of courted each other for several months.
Sure.
And we had a handshake on a deal.
Okay.
Well, when I got the contract, it didn't look like anything that we had talked about. A lot of the stuff had been stripped out of it. And I said, I'm not going to sign this. This is not what we discussed. Well, he got upset, and he was very interested in what I was going to do next. Well, I was it was kind of late in the game at this point. It's January of my last year of residency, and I thought, I'm just going to shift focus here, and I'm just going to go do my own thing.
Right.
It kind of turned me off on the associateship.
You got burned and felt like... I
got burned. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Right.
I'm not saying that's the smartest thing that I've ever done, because there was a lot of things that I didn't know. But I'm like, I can do this.
Right.
How hard can it be?
Why not?
Why not? So that I was kind of independent streak at that point, and I was had a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth from the standpoint of what had happened. So I thought, I'll just do my own thing. So I went out and I did a startup oral surgery practice.
Okay. And what's different? I guess you wouldn't know what's different, but I would say for someone who is a specialist looking to do their own practice, maybe they come into it assuming one set of things. They get into it and they realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. For you, did you have any of those moments of thinking it was going to be one way and ending up being another way?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned looking back is the old adage, if you build it, they will come, is not necessarily true.
Okay.
Another thing that I learned was you can find out where you want to live first. Because it was always told to me that you need to live in the community where you work.
Okay.
And maybe some places are still that way. I'm in a small town in Middle Tennessee, and there's been some benefit for living in the community.
Sure.
But I know a lot of healthcare providers that have done very well in their own practices that don't live here. I'm about 30 minutes east of Nashville, and they live in Nashville and then drive out here. So they have kind of a remote practice from where they're actually living.
Okay.
And that model works just as well. So I don't necessarily think that that's true in every case. You don't have to live in the community, but I think there's some benefit to that.
Right.
So those are a couple things that I had in my mind that turned out to be not necessarily so.
I know within oral surgery and a lot of other specialties, I've spoken with specialists who have been frustrated with kind of courting GPs and realizing that they can't do as much direct marketing to patients. They kind of have to work through their general dentists. And it sounds like that's something obviously you're great at. You've got this podcast, you're helping other people out. But was that something that surprised you, or did you kind of know going in that this is the name of the game, and unfortunately it's kind of part of how it works?
Well, some of the old school surgeons that I train with, and not to take anything away from them, they're great guys, but they had the mentality of, you're the specialist, don't worry about that. They're going to come. It's kind of, you build it, they'll come because you're the specialist.
Right.
I mean, you've got all these extra skills, and so your ego kind of puts you in a position where you think you don't have to do all that.
Right.
And that's not true. You actually have to reach out and build relationships and set your ego aside to make that work. Okay. And that's something that you don't necessarily get in your training as a specialist, in my experience as a specialist.
No, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, what year was this that you did that startup, and what were some of the challenges that you encountered early on that, looking back, at the time were a big deal, and now you're glad you've got figured out?
So I started my practice in 2002.
Okay.
First thing was the build out. The build out would take 3 months.
Oh, of course. Always on time.
Always on time. Right. Always on time. And always under budget. Both wrong. Double it easily. Okay. And if not, it'll probably be longer.
Sure.
So you're dealing with contractors, you're dealing with project managers, and it can be frustrating.
Sure.
Well, I was in a position where I could be on site every day or every other day to make sure things were going the right way, and it was still mistakes being made.
Yeah.
And they're trying to charge me for change orders in the construction.
That's frustrating. Well,
so it's some of
them have dental experience, some of them don't. Sometimes the dental experience isn't the same experience as what you want, and so they're running into problems every single time that you hadn't anticipated, they hadn't anticipated. It just prepare yourself for a little chaos, is from what I understand.
Oh, absolutely. Chaos that's a good word for it. And another thing, you've got your plan, you've got your timeline laid out.
Right.
Well, that's all shifted. So now I'm going to be working in 3 months, and it turns out to be 9 months. So you got 6 months of time. You're sitting there twiddling your thumbs.
Right.
What am I going to do now? So I took that opportunity to go out and start knocking doors and meeting the dentist in town, meeting the other physicians. Oh yeah, I took it on myself. I got a list of dentists in my county, and I made it a point to go around and try and meet every one of them. Some of them were very warm and invited me in and had a discussion with me. Some of them like, we've got our specialists. We don't need you. And it's so that you get some doors shut in your face, and that's okay.
Right.
And some of those guys I work with today, we've built a relationship, and we're plugging along and have a great professional and personal relationship at this point.
Sure. Well, and you never know up front, those initial rejections, same thing with patients and with others, that those can turn around and like you said, become great relationships later.
Oh, don't burn your bridges.
No, not at all.
Don't burn your bridges.
So, you mentioned on your podcast, and this is one of the episodes I really appreciated, was that you realized a few years into your practice, some of your personality traits around certain issues. You had certain triggers for certain issues that you didn't realize at first were so much of an issue with the staff as what they ended up being. Do you mind talking about that experience and kind of what turned you on to that and how that changed as you understood your personality and how that fit into your practice? And the reason I'm asking this is because we've been talking about personality traits that either predispose us towards ownership, like not wanting to work for other people. That's a big one, but also things that we should know going into ownership that, okay, I'm this way when I own my own practice and manage people. I'm going to need to adjust the way that I work this way to compensate for that.
Sure. I had an opportunity to do a leadership program here in the county. This is a county leadership program that they have applications from different people come in. They select about 20 or 30 people. And the first thing you do is in the first meeting, you get on a bus and you go to a retreat for 2 days.
Okay.
We're standing there in this big group of people. People are chatting. And they say, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to load the bus and you're going to get you a partner to ride this 90-minute trip to the retreat site. You grab a partner, but you can't be anyone you know. If you know someone in the group, you can't use them.
Okay.
And what you're wanting to do is we want you to ask them some questions, who they are, where they're from, what they do, family life, just some personal questions.
Sure.
So I'm standing here in this group, and I'm an introvert. That's what most people would say. So I'm standing here. I'm just kind of watching the crowd, just observing, and I look over, and there's another guy doing the same thing. So everybody partners up, and at the end of the day, we're the only two standing there. I'm like, well, it looks like it's me and you. So we get on the bus, we ride 90 minutes. I think we may have talked for 10 minutes or so.
Oh wow!
We got our answers that we needed, and we rode the bus ride. Very, wasn't awkward to me at all.
Yeah,
we get there, we get off the bus, we go in, and they have us do this personality test, and then they give us this color coding.
Okay.
Well, the color codings are red, orange, yellow, and green.
Okay.
Red being an aggressive, real outgoing, center of attention type personality. The yellow, I think it was actually orange, was you're kind of a mix of multiple personalities. You're kind of a chameleon. You can adapt and be flexible. The blue was very philanthropic. They're very sensitive and very giving. And then the green, very analytical.
Okay.
Almost to a point where it seemed cold.
Sure.
When they broke this group of 30 people out, there was only 3 of us in the green group.
Mm.
And the guy I sat with was another green personality.
Right.
So they got this big kick out of this whole thing because the 2 green personalities sat with each other, and we didn't speak for 10 minutes. So I learned right there, communication was a struggle or an obstacle for me.
Okay.
Because I'm sitting here thinking all these things in my mind, expecting the guy next to me to know them. Doesn't work that way. So communication.
So was that kind of the first time that you realized, like, you know what? I'm a little bit more analytical and I'm not as warm and cuddly of a communicator as maybe some of the people around me.
Right. You play to your strengths.
Sure.
And sometimes when you overplay those, in my particular case, you're analytical. And I think a lot of us as dentists, we're analytical.
Yeah.
We sometimes come across as cold or insensitive. It's not the case. I think most dentists are pretty warm and fun guys and gals, and they have hearts of gold. But at the end of the day, we're analytical. And when we play that strength, we can come across that way.
Right.
So that was one of the first things that I kind of reflected back going, wow, that's kind of interesting. I never really thought of myself that way, but it does add up to what people have told me.
Right. And then
the second thing that I learned was that the biggest problem that I had was my ego.
Okay.
And the way I dealt with conflict. And this little questionnaire, this personality test, I thought there's no way they can tell you anything about your personality in this little questionnaire. Mm-hmm. But as we read through it and they give the description, I'm like, wow, that's pretty accurate of me. So the conflict for me, I will concede most everything in an argument to avoid conflict.
Okay. I
just don't like it. I don't feel comfortable with it. It's awkward for me, and I will go out of my way to avoid it. However, and let me qualify that. If it's small things.
Right. I mean, no one likes to fight over things that don't matter.
And the problem is the way my personality worked was I don't communicate well. So you don't know what the little things are in my mind versus the ones that are of a principle and are valuable in my mind, or of high value.
Okay.
So you never know when you're going to run across those. You think it's maybe something that's small that I've conceded multiple times to you, but you step on one of the things that I hold of high value, and I'll fight you to the death, and I'll come across aggressive, and people think, well, he's unstable because he just explodes at this little bitty thing.
Sure.
Well, I don't communicate. I don't do well with conflict. And the thing is because I don't communicate, you don't know what the big things versus the little things are with me.
Right.
So I come off as being unstable sometimes. And I learned that about myself, and I've improved that. And that's going with that whole concept of knowing who you are and knowing your ego, putting it aside and trying to adjust yourself and improve yourself to overcome those things.
No, absolutely. And, sometimes it takes feedback from multiple people or an event or something to kind of trigger us into realizing something's not working here. I need to figure out a better way to make this work. Was there a specific point where you kind of just realized that you needed to maybe change the way that you were communicating, or what triggered that for you?
Well, I carried that on probably, and feedback. You make a very good point there, Richard. We get feedback every day. Right. Every time we interact with other people, we get feedback. The question is whether or not we recognize it, and do we take action on it?
Right.
Based on, if you get a regular pattern of feedback, there's probably something to it. And we sometimes just ignore that, or we try to bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, that's not me. That's not me.
Right.
So you got to be open to feedback.
Sure. Well,
to improve upon it, I think.
Absolutely. And I just can't remember. I know there was a consultant involved. That's the story I was trying to get out of you. I just can't remember how that all started. We'll get to that story in a minute, but first, a word from our sponsor, Q Optics. Okay, we've got back with us Brent Downs from Q Optics, the director of sales. And you were about to tell me a story about a friend that you met while helping him out and showing him a product.
Yeah, I got tons of these kind of stories, but the one that sticks out to me, Dr. Kenny Crossland, he's out in West Texas. I first met him 1989, 1990, and tried to sell him a pair of loupes, and he said, no, not interested.
Okay.
And over the years, I would see him at different meetings, or I'd be out in West Texas. And this went on for years and years and years. And it got to the point where I wasn't so much interested in selling anything to him.
Sure.
But we just became friends. And he has a mutual friend of mine as well. So kind of the three of us, became friends. Every time I would see him at at a state meeting or a regional meeting, we weren't talking about loops. We were, catching up on family.
Sure.
And so lo and behold, in 2014, 24 years after the fact, he comes up to me and says, I want to buy some loops and headlight from you. How's that sound? And I was completely floored that he was actually ready to pull the trigger after 24 years of visiting. And so it was secondary to the relationship. It was a lot of fun. We still talk about it. It only took him 24 years to make a decision.
If you're the type that needs some time before you make a purchasing decision, that's totally fine. You can email sales@qoptics.com with the promo code SP16 for $100 off a pair of loops or $300 off a loops and light combo. Q Optics. Let's have a better look. Remember how that all started?
Oh, yeah. So about 3 years ago, I had a consultant come in. We're trying to do some things to improve the business. I was approaching burnout. I was pretty frustrated. I was explosive in my personality. Things weren't going well. And it was pretty rough. It was a kind of a dark time in my practice.
Okay.
And I said, well, let me get a consultant in here and see if he can give us some outside evaluation,
Sure.
give me some input. Well, the day that he showed up, I had a staff member that, and I don't even remember the details. It was so small, but I just exploded. I just went crazy in my office with this guy sitting in the chair. And looking back, I'm not proud of the fact, but he looked at me and he said, I don't know that I can work with you. And I'm like, well, I thought you had all the answers. You're Mr. Consultant, give me the answers.
Yeah.
You're supposed to come in here and give me the prescription to fix all of this.
Sure.
And I was really indignant and rude to him. And he had all the right in the world to get up and walk out and go, this guy's crazy. I don't need to talk to him. But he stuck around, and my office manager came in to kind of buffer all of this and
Bring it all down a few notches. He heard what was going on, and he thought, man, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to go in there and see if I can diffuse this. And he was fairly new to the practice at that time himself. Oh, wow.
My office manager. So I took
some courage on his part.
Yeah, I took a walk around the parking lot to cool my jets and came back, and this guy looked me straight in the eye. He goes, I've seen this before. You're a perfectionist. Most of us in this profession are, because he's a dentist also.
Oh, wow.
He said, and you have a lot of emotional immaturity. He said, you're a bright guy. You're obviously done well from your training and education, but emotionally you're immature.
Huh.
And you've got to learn to control that and come from a more objective standpoint than an emotional standpoint when you're making decisions and you're interacting with people. And I had two options there.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
I could have kicked him out of the office.
Easily.
Which ran across my mind, or I could have sat there and go, okay, tell me more. Fortunately, I said, tell me more.
Sure.
And so he explained to me what he was talking about, and it opened my eyes. And talking about feedback, he was giving me feedback. Fortunately, I was in a position where I actually listened. So it was valuable to me, and I owe that guy a lot for what he did for me, just in that one moment in time.
Do you mind sharing his name, who that was?
Oh, no. Mike Schuster with the Schuster Center. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. My I don't think he's related, but my faculty in dental school was Dr. Schuster. He was my clinical faculty. Well, okay. So this was awesome. We kind of got a perspective of your journey, what led you to ownership, some of the personality things that you've dealt with and that you've been able to overcome with feedback and different perspectives. And we're all working on our own different personalities and how those fit with other personalities we're working with. One of the things that you had mentioned was just a few little pieces of advice that you'd have for a new dentist who's looking at ownership, looking at doing their own thing, coming out of dental school. They feel like they've learned a lot. And you kind of went into this already, but some of that ego and some of these other things that you'd talked about.
Sure. Ego. I talk a lot about that in my podcast. I talk about it a lot today, but we sometimes get in our own way. And we need to be open to learn from others, to take that feedback that you mentioned and apply it, evaluate it and apply it to help improve ourselves. And when you come out of training, we all come out, we've, been successful. We're a small minority when you look at the percentage of the population
right.
to do the things that we do. And we're very proud of it, and rightly so.
Absolutely.
But we sometimes let that go to our head, and that can be problematic. So you got to understand that you don't know everything, although we think we do when we come out of training.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to learn more and open your mind to others. You have to find your mentors. I'm not saying that everything that someone tells you, you run with it, because that's not true. You still have to, it's that old adage, trust but verify.
Sure.
You can listen, and people are more than willing to share their advice. But you have to be able to accept some of that and evaluate it for what it's worth. And then if it works for you, apply it and move forward.
For me,
you don't know what you don't know.
One of the interesting situations has been some of the dental assistants where I work have been here for 10, 15, 20 years. And some of them are kind of, stuck in their ways and have been doing things a certain way, and that's fine. Other ones have some really great advice and feedback and can really help out a young doctor if that young doctor is willing to take that advice. But it's a hard pill to swallow to realize, yes, I'm the doctor, you're the assistant, and it should be that I know everything, but that's not the case. And being open to both feedback, I'm always trying to ask, like, would you have done anything different, especially when things go wrong? When a procedure didn't go perfectly, or the patient was really stressed out or unhappy, to ask my assistant afterwards, was there anything I could have done differently, or did you see anything in there? And I've been amazed at some of the advice and some of the feedback that I've gotten there.
Oh, that's a great example. And I started out my practice, I was the doctor. You're going to do what I tell you to do. And, you stand over there and don't give me any feedback.
Well,
and let me add to that. Over the evolution of my practice, now my staff know they have the freedom to stop me at any point. Now, a lot of my patients are sedated, some of them are not.
Sure.
But we have our own little internal signals. If you're going to work on the wrong tooth, if
right.
you're going to give a drug that staff member knows that they're allergic to, they
key.
can stop this thing at any point and call me out, and I'm okay with it. Whereas before I wouldn't have been. They're trying to keep you out of trouble.
Right.
And they have knowledge, and they are there, and they're there to help you. And so that's a great point. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like especially every time that I work in oral surgery, both now in my residency and before in dental school, the stakes are just a little bit higher. And so I feel like the dynamic of when someone screws something up is a little bit more, like I said, just high stakes, high emotion, and in that dynamic of being afraid to bring things up is definitely more of an issue. I've felt in an oral surgery type environment where patients' airways are at risk and all these things going on. It makes for a higher stakes, kind of higher charged environment. Would you agree on that?
There are some potential issues that could come up that could be life-threatening, of course.
Sure.
But I even take that down to the simple things. I always take it a just simple thing like we've all potentially moved into working on the wrong tooth, whether that be to extract it, to do a preparation on, or whatever.
Yeah. And
you're just if the assistant can stop you in whatever manner you choose to build that communication with them, while you can be prevented from doing that, because that makes for a bad day.
Yeah, for everybody.
Yeah, and if you do this game long enough, that's going to happen to you.
Sure.
And it's happened to me, and unfortunately, my staff have intervened and said, "Hey, Doc, can I ask you a question?" And I'll look at them and I know exactly what they're saying. I'm like, "Oh, geez, thank you. You saved me.
Yeah.
I was gonna take out the wrong tooth here."
Sure.
So you have to be willing to set that ego aside and let folks help you.
Absolutely. Okay. So, and that plays into you had mentioned talking about relationships, so ego and relationships. And what were you going to say there with that?
Oh, relationships. It's been hard for me over the years to accept this, but I believe that everything's built around relationships. Relationships with your patients, relationships with your colleagues out in town and in the profession, with your staff, with your vendors, with your sales reps, because it's a reflection of who you are. And I never bought into that early on.
Mm.
I was thinking, I'm the doctor, I've got the skill set, and that's all I need. Well, that's not necessarily true.
Sure.
You'll go a long way when you understand that relationships are key in maintaining that network, building that network, nurturing and growing that network.
No, that's huge. And that, go ahead.
Yeah, because it brings a lot of value to you, and it goes back to that whole thing. People can teach you if you're willing to learn.
Well, and the last thing that you had brought up and talked about before the show when we were talking about this kind of plays into that, is this idea of coming in as an associate into a new practice, and some of the questions you've been asked and some of the questions that maybe you would have preferred have been asked kind of have to do with relationships. Do you mind talking about your experience hiring associates and how that's gone and what you've seen and what you'd like to see?
Well, that's coming from a little different perspective. As a practice owner, someone's wanting to come in. I'm trying to hire an associate. Associate's looking for a position, for potential buy-in, for potential partnership.
Sure.
And when you're talking with them, that courtship that we had referred to earlier, you're trying to get a feel for who the other person is and if they'll fit within your practice, if they have the same philosophy, the same type of mindset. And you go to talk to them and say, hey, do you have any questions? And the first thing they ask you is, well, how much vacation time do I get?
Ugh.
Probably not the best. And this has happened to me. Probably
Really?
Not the best question to lead with.
No way.
Yeah. So
how little can I work here?
Yeah, maybe that was an anomaly. Maybe that's not really the case. But
maybe they were nervous and just
maybe they were
blurted something out.
And then how many days do I have to work? So it's more about how little can I be here?
Right.
Rather than the questions that I would prefer to hear is, well, how busy are you? And do you have enough business and enough patience for me to stay busy to provide for my family?
Has anyone ever asked that?
No. And also, hey, are you busy enough that we can put some incentives in place that I can even do better for myself and help the practice?
Have you had people that want a percentage type structure versus a flat pay? What kind of arrangements have you dealt with?
Traditionally, the ones that we had offered were a flat salary with an incentive trigger.
Okay.
Once they hit a certain level of production. And that's kind of the way we've traditionally set it up.
Okay. No, that's great.
Yeah, you know, I think it was 30% after, I can't remember the figure on the last contract that we pitched, but it was you get an incentive. The harder the work, the harder you work, and the more you bring to the practice to help the practice, you'll be rewarded for it financially. So
in one of the interviews I did recently, we talked about this idea of structuring a buy-in up front versus waiting and kind of doing a trial period before structuring a buy-in type thing. What are your opinions on you being the business owner, having built this business, on having someone buy in potentially to your practice?
Well, and we'd mentioned this in the pre-call, the pre-interview call. You get folks. I've been in private practice for 15 years, and I've built the practice over 15 years. And this is from an owner's perspective.
Sure.
When you walk in, they've spent 15, 20, 25 years building that practice. And some folks want to come in and traditionally, I want to work a year or 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then I want to buy into half of the practice, become a half owner. If it's a single practice guy and you're going to be the second person, of course. That can be a little unnerving for a practice owner because I've been working 15 years to get where we're at, and you're going to spend 2 or 3 and have the potential to own half of it.
Mm.
So you look at it from an owner's perspective. How can you make that conversation a little easier? And I don't know exactly how you would do that. Maybe just recognizing the fact, hey, I know it took you 15 years to build this, and I recognize that and I understand it. And if we work together and things work out, what point in time do you think we could look at me potentially having ownership in the practice?
Sure.
Maybe a better way to play it. I don't know.
Rather than the first question out of their mouth is, okay, how soon can I buy in?
Yes. And you haven't worked, maybe a day or a week or a month there.
You don't even know if you guys are going to
You don't even know if you're going to get along
well
with
together. Okay.
Yeah.
No, and I love that perspective that you brought that up, because when you say it that way, that you've built this thing, this is your baby. You've been through painful trial and error, through, self-education. You've built this practice up from nothing over this period of time. And to have someone just kind of swoop in and say, oh, okay, I want half of it. I've never heard it put that way, but it makes so much sense that's why a lot of owners are hesitant to maybe talk about these things up front, and therefore also the reason maybe they put people off, and someone gets a year in, year and a half in, 2 years in, and they talked about initially maybe buying in, and it kind of never happens. Maybe this is one of the factors that plays into that.
I think so. If you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, probably from the owner's mind, that may be part of the problem.
Sure.
To drag that out. And I've heard, and this may be specific to the oral surgery community, because that's traditionally who I've talked to in these type of transitions. But that's a pretty common thing that I've heard across the board, is these things get drug out and you never get the opportunity to buy in. And it's unfair. It's unfair to the person coming in as the associate with the expectation to buy part of the practice.
Right.
It's unfair to them as you can't drag somebody out like that.
Well, and it's definitely not exclusive to oral surgery. That is very, very common among the GP community as well, of this idea of, oh yeah, I'm either going to buy in or buy out this doctor. And then it doesn't happen.
Gotcha.
And after 3-4 years of waiting around and saying, okay, they keep saying next year, doesn't happen. So to prevent that, some of the keys, like you said, asking up front, why do you want an associate? What are you looking for? And being very clear up front about expectations. Is this something that you want to take more vacation time, and so you need someone to come in and cover for you? Are you looking at changing your procedure mix, and so you want me to do certain things so you can do more orthognathic cases, or whatever it is you want to do? And being upfront about those expectations, I think, can eliminate part of the doubt that kind of creeps in, and also make sure everyone's on the same page. And then maybe in 6 months to a year, setting the expectation up front, saying, okay, let's try this out for a little while. And then after 6 months to a year, let's sit down and really nail down the details. So we have a plan and we have expectations, and we know after a certain point, if I don't have an opportunity to buy in, I'm probably going to be leaving, or this is when we'd really like to evaluate it and move forward with that. How close have you gotten to having a partner or having someone buy in? Has that been something that's almost happened for you, or not really?
Yes, we've had a couple of circumstances where people were, I think we were one of 2 practices that were at the end of the vetting process for that associate.
Okay.
One was because of a family change, and they stayed close to where their family actually lived, because they would have been moving away from family, and so they had children. They were fixing to have a new baby, so they decided to stay there. I certainly understand that. And we still have great communication. We still have a great relationship from my standpoint. And the other person decided to go with a bigger group, because I think there might be some comfort level with a larger group. You know, as far as the patient load. Sure.
No, absolutely.
We've been down to the wire as one of 2, if you will.
Okay. And so any other advice that you would offer to an associate looking to buy into an ownership type deal from your perspective?
I think you made a good point there about trying to communicate, be clear on what the expectations are from both parties. And that's hard to do because you can't write everything down. You can't discuss everything. There's going to have to be some flexibility.
And things change,
Exactly. Things change as time goes forward. But one of the questions you might ask, if you've got folks out there that are looking to go into an associateship for future practice purchase or buy-in, is to ask the doc, are you going to be willing to teach me? You're not just going to put me in a satellite office by myself out here to struggle and me not learn anything, are you? Because that's a fair question.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to sit down and talk with me from a clinical and as well as a business standpoint and help me learn the business, learn more clinical skills? Because even though we come out of dental school, we're still not really where we need to be clinically. And I think it's important to have an opportunity to learn from people that have been doing it, that 10,000 repetitions to mastery kind of mentality. You got guys been out in practice 20, 25, 30 years, whatever. They've done these things time and time again, and they probably have some tricks up their sleeve. And if they're willing to teach you, it'll help you become a better clinician as well as understanding the business. You have to ask that question as well.
Well, and I would ask as a follow-up to that question, if there's a way that you guys could structure it like a time of the week, because what I've seen happen and what people have told me is that, he said he was going to mentor me, but is that my chair time or his chair time? Who's giving up what? And if the associate expects that the mentor, quote unquote, is going to come in and watch them work or something like that, or teach them in a certain way, and that's not going to happen. They need to realize up front that either you're going to have time that you're going to sit down and look at a case together, or you're going to be ready with a case so that when there's a free moment, you can chat about it, or you're going to watch the mentor potentially on a case or on a case-by-case basis, maybe a little bit of hand-holding on a procedure that they know a whole lot more about and a little bit less with. But having those expectations of, he said he was going to mentor me, what does that mean? And getting some clarity on that would be a follow-up to that.
I think exactly, because like you say, we all get busy. We're all going different ways. We're working hard. And the next thing you know, we're 6 months down the road. You haven't mentored me one day.
Sure.
1 hour. You may have to build that in your schedule.
Yeah.
And just say, on Fridays at noon, we're going to sit down and we're going to do this, or Wednesdays, whatever the case may be. I think it's to get buy-in on both sides of that and say, no, this is what we agreed to. And this is what I expect from both parties.
Absolutely. And the key is, I think there was someone on the Brain Trust, on Alan Mead's Brain Trust, I had posted this question about associateships. And one of their big key points was, if every single job you take is making you a better clinician, a better person, is teaching you business skills, is moving you forward, then it's almost like you can never go wrong as long as you continually are moving forward and progressing. And having these opportunities doesn't happen by accident. You don't just stumble into always getting better. You have to create those opportunities. You have to create expectations. You have to create relationships where all of these things come from. And it sounds like you've had a lot of these opportunities to grow and to learn, and practice ownership kind of puts you into those sometimes without you choosing to be in those circumstances. You have to learn how to be a practice owner. You have to learn how to manage people. You have to learn all these different things. And that's the thing I've loved about your podcast. There are so few dental podcasts where one person is speaking by themselves that can hold my attention. I've got a short attention span. If there's not some sort of conversation or group dynamic going on, I just drift off, and I listened to 30 of your episodes straight. So you had me hooked. So if anyone,
I appreciate that.
If anyone is looking for some business knowledge and for another perspective, definitely check out the Business of Dentistry Podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Kirk, or I guess Russell, for being willing to set aside a Saturday morning and chat with me for a few minutes and offer some advice to our audience.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Keep up the good work, man. You're doing great things. And like I say, it's always a continual student. I listen to your podcast as well as many others, and there's great things out there. It's just a great platform to share knowledge and gain understanding and get different perspectives. And I think at the end of the day, that's why I'm so attracted to it.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Russell. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Richard. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Well, I hope you guys got some value out of that. I sure had a lot of fun interviewing Dr. Kirk, and we'll get to see him at Nashville, Tennessee for the Voices of Dentistry Summit. Thank you to everyone who's left us an iTunes review and that has shared it with a friend. Right now, things are a little bit crazy in my residency, so I'm pouring up models and mounting casts and treatment planning until my eyes are bleeding. So if I don't get back to you, or if you've emailed me and it's been a couple days, sorry about that. But I still will eventually get back to you. So email me with any questions you have or any feedback for the show, any requests, richard@sharedpractices.com. If you have any corporate experiences you want to share, I said that we'd have a Google Doc up. It's not up. So just email me your story, richard@sharedpractices.com. And then if I have any clarifying questions I can ask you, or I can reach out that way. So anyways, this has been the Shared Practices Podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.